All right, we are recording for next chapter in iRobot, Little Lost Robot, which is an interesting one, and I do like it. It is interesting rereading it now, because I do remember it. I like it enough that despite it being so many years since I last read it, um, I remember it a lot, but rereading it, I do see some flaws to it. Some that are inconsistencies where it's like, well, time has passed, so maybe. But another where it's like, just another thing that the explanation for the solution to the problem, haven't explained what the problem is yet, I know, but the explanation for how they solve it, um, I think doesn't hold up as well. Now, it doesn't need to change what the solution is. I think that the explanation is just a little weak, a little weak. So, what's the idea? They are Dr. Susan Calvin and Peter Bogert have had to travel to Hyperbase, as it's called, which is an asteroid that has had a research facility placed there by the government, partly also by the military, to develop hyperatomic drives, hyperatomic engines, something like that. Basically, what Asimov is saying would be necessary for interstellar travel, which is ultimately created. Um, in fact, the journalist who, as he's talking with her, but basically asked for something a bit more interesting what he'd been getting in part in like what about interstellar travel? It's only been about 20 years since the hyperatomic motor was invented, and it's well known that it was a robotic invention. What is the truth about it? Trying to get more details on it. Basically we got the textbooks. What more was there? Since you potentially would know something about it. So Hyperbase, it was with humans and also with robots, specifically the NS2 models, I think it had said. They're referred to as nesters. And there they do their work on the etheric fields, something like that, that would be the underlying physics of these drives. But they ran into a problem initially, and this is something that she was initially not told. Bobert knows, as does the general that brings him there. They had a problem. The research involved included some amount of radiation exposure. Now, the thing is, the levels would be low enough to not be harmful to humans, although it is acknowledged there were two incidents, neither fatal, but there have been incident, but only the two incidents. The thing is that the first law of robotics is neither through action nor inaction may a robot allow a human to come to harm. Well, that inaction thing is kind of a problem, because if a human is staying there and is going to be exposed to stuff, the robots will run in and try to rescue them. Even if it is not going to actually harm them, the robots still have that reaction, sort of a zero tolerance policy. And it's also problematic because the first law is so important that they will go in, and these gamma rays can actually destroy the robots. It like depolarizes the brain. If this was Star Trek, polarization was so important in Star Trek. Anyway, so what ended up happening was the government compelled U.S. robotics, and it was basically they were going to give us a bunch of money, or ensure that our company is crushed. So we kind of had to take the bunch of money. Yeah, you don't always have ethical people in these places. Anyhow, but it was to have a modified first law, where now it is a robot cannot actively harm a human, but can allow them to be harmed through inaction, so they won't rush in to rescue a human who's being exposed to gamma rays. And there's more to it as well, because the nesters are actually working with the humans, and so they are being taught the physics involved so they can assist them. This is actually very important to the ultimate plot. So the problem is, they've made 12 of these modified ones, and great measures have been taken to obscure these, so that nobody knows, because the idea of being able to have a partial impression of the first law is a terrifying one to the populace, or at least that's what the concern is, that the anti-robot people would be inflamed by that, so excited by that they would lead to issues, which honestly is something I feel is not necessarily true. Just when thinking about, now, to be fair, he was living during the period, I'm living after it, but there's a lot of stuff that scared a lot of people that today there's still a great deal of ignorance around it, but I don't think people are as scared of this stuff anymore. That's like, yeah, it's just a fact of life kind of thing. I mean, there would still be NIMBY and not in my backyard kind of stuff, but in like with various things about atomics, whether it's atomic weapons or atomic power, both of which there's a tremendous amount of ignorance, especially with atomic power. A tremendous amount of ignorance as to the actual dangers there. They're far less than most people realize, especially when you consider the potentials from it. And that is in part born out of the early nuclear era, where people only associated with nuclear weapons, and in some cases that was intentional by other people trying to control the situation. Anyhow, that's going a little far afield, but it is still today, even though you may have some people that would say, no, I don't want a nuclear power plant nearby, you would also, I think that plenty of people wouldn't, like, if just the idea of another one being built isn't necessarily going to get the masses to react poorly to that. It would just be those that may be living near it. But then also there would probably be plenty that would be like, actually, I love that idea because that means jobs that even if I'm not getting it, it still is we're going to have people that will move here, get high-paying jobs, and then I can work to serve them. So it's, you'd still be able to see some people rationalize it, even if it is some people that rationalize it, yes, it's good with still having the fear, those who know enough to not be so afraid, and then it would be fewer who were actually doing things about it. And it seems like Asimov believes you would continue to have, because this is like decades later, like the whole, like from the lobby, the first chapter to now would be many decades, like 4 or 5, but probably more like 4. Yeah. Actually, in theory, I could check because it might actually be more like 3. Anyhow. That's just me personally. It does annoy me when I see in this and some other stories how it seems like human temperament doesn't change despite generations going by. It is an annoyance to me because, like, no, we do, our temperaments do change from generation to generation, or even just, the person themselves. We do relax, we adapt, we get used to certain things, and we move on. Sometimes it's not always good, but it is what happens. Anyway, so 12 of these nesters were made. One of them has disappeared. Yeah, I'm just... I made a... Well, here, I should actually be paying attention to more of these. Anyway, 12 of these have been made. And they are hiding amongst them because it's like they're not even putting serial numbers on these things so that no one will know. And that's like, okay, you're really going far with the conspiracy here. Like, you could probably relax on that a little bit. But, okay, no, that's... Okay, so here it's basically that they're trying to figure it out because the robot is lost among 62, so there's now 63. 62 of them are normal. The 63rd is a special one. And this is just, she hates this. Calvin absolutely despises the situation, and at one point threatens to resign, and to then expose what has happened, because then she knows, to her, Bogart just describes her as neurotic and paranoid, and it's like, okay, in some ways, I understand that, but he also has a dislike for her, it seems. That he is exaggerating that point. I mean, she does have a significant concern with robots. And the funny thing is, a certain aspect of what he says. Okay, that's a different point that I do want to talk about. The way he talks, because he's a mathematician, the way he talks about the laws of robotics and with her, so they're both talking together, confirming this point with each other, does suggest that the laws don't just exist to impress a morality onto the robots. It's also a mathematical necessity. Like, the functions of the robot brains will cease to have proper mathematical solutions without these laws. Which seems a little odd, but there is actually a reference at one point that if you didn't have the first law of robotics, then you'd start having problems that would have basically you start having problems that you work it out and it would be imaginary numbers, and that kind of a problem. It's like I get that, but it is also that's actually true. For what the math is that these specific nesters are being asked to do, you'd definitely be involving complex numbers, imaginary numbers, so maybe that's not so big a problem. But she's concerned that by loosening the first law, you are essentially preparing them to be able to go insane and wish to harm humans and start doing so. In fact, the highlight here that I said is a point I do want to talk about. I do disagree with this, but I still want to read it out. And it does kind of capture her point of view. All normal life, Peter, consciously or otherwise, resents domination. If the domination is by an inferior or by a supposed inferior, the resentment becomes stronger. Physically and to an extent mentally, any robot, is superior to human beings. What makes them slavish then? Only the first law. Why? Without it, the first order you tried to give a robot would result in your death. Unstable? What do you think? I disagree with this point, because there are definitely situations where one is... It also depends on what you consider dominated, but here's actually one example. Your boss dominates you in the way she's kind of described, right? And it is possible for a boss to be inferior to their employees when it comes to certain actions. So Bogart is not a good example here, but let's just say he is currently the head of U.S. robotics. So he did get the promotion following Herbie, the mind reading robot. And this is some years later, but in any case, he's a mathematician. But in theory, the head of U.S. robotics wouldn't necessarily need to be. You could have the president of the company, you could have the CEO of the company not be versed in the actual work of the specifics of the work of the company, but is a very good company leader. So you could have then subordinates who are superior mentally in the company, but doesn't necessarily resent them. In some cases, they may, but it is not inherent that would be the case. In fact, I could see some where it's like, I'm glad, because that means I get to sit here and just do my stuff with numbers. That dude over there, he has to worry about whether or not the company's going to be open tomorrow or not. I don't want that responsibility. He can have that. So it's, despite being dominated, it still is, it doesn't compel resentment as she is suggesting here. And the whole point about, well, the robots are superior. Well, not in all ways. And it is also, like, another example I actually put in my notes is if you imagine an experienced farmer. This is somebody who, because of their physical routine, which would be greater than mine, would be stronger than me. So physically is dominant over me. In some ways mentally dominant as well, because I would not be able to run a farm very likely. I would need to learn that. They already know. So in that regard, mentally, they dominate me in that way as well. Do I feel dominated by farmers? No. Am I reliant on them? Do I rely on them? Yes. But do I feel dominated by them? No. Do I resent it? No. Why would I? And there's also an aspect that, going to the robots specifically, because robots are creations, they are created to a specific purpose. And they're also, I'm going to say, not sentient in this case. You could argue that in some ways, how Asimov describes them, they are. Many robots in science fiction are given a level of sentience. But let's at least say that an inferior sentience to humans. They are still lesser in that sense, essentially. They are built, they are constructed for a purpose. And that purpose is technically to serve, is to perform certain tasks that humans are incapable of or just ill-equipped for. For example, asteroid mining would be one example that is mentioned here. Both with the Dave story with the Catch That Rabbit was the name of that chapter. Kind of lost my train of thought on that specific point, but anyway, now I'm starting to lose the other one. The original one. Damn it, what was it? That they exist for a specific purpose. Which would mean then that them fulfilling that purpose is going to be satisfying for them. It's like it is a good thing for them to do that. So that would also be like for a human being, when you figure out what your vocation is, or should be, what your calling is to do that thing, is tremendously satisfying, is tremendously fulfilling. But the thing is that humans are typically not made to a purpose. We find that purpose in life. Robots would be made to that purpose. It is not that they find it in life. No, they are given it at even prior to creation, because like, oh, well, we need this. We need so many robots for this purpose. So again, it is through knowing that they could even have a sense of freedom such that they're not dominated, they are satisfying their own roles in existence. So yeah, you're kind of going back to the whole the one on the satellite. I'm trying to remember what they were called in that. It was in Reason Cutie. That was it, Cutie. Because Cutie starts thinking that he's the prophet for this for the energy converter. That gives him actually great satisfaction. So he in no way would feel dominated by anything except for the converter, but he feels that is his purpose. So yeah. But I should grant that as I'm getting into that kind of weird details with this, it is technically an inconsistency, but this is a collection of short stories. He's trying to share different things, different aspects. So I really need to move on from that point. Come on. It is a little weird. The Kobo, sometimes when I select a highlight, so it's a little easy to read, it puts the thing there to like change the color and such. It puts it over the highlight, so I need to like retap it. It's a little annoying. But anyway, so Calvin has gone to speak with Bogart about some of this stuff, and she's said her piece. He said and she's leaving. He saw no reason to change his perennial opinion of her as a sour and fidgety frustration. Susan Calvin's train of thought did not include Bogart in the least. She had dismissed him years ago as a smooth and pretentious sleekness. They do not get along. Okay, so let's... So, getting to why this robot is doing this. Because the human that he was working with, he annoyed a lot. Apparently that's just an issue with these nesters, that they are curious, eager to show off their knowledge, because they feel superior to the people around them, and they want to demonstrate that. And he did, and it was just Nestor 10 did, and this human, something black, I don't remember what the first name was, just was already frustrated from the day, already annoyed, and so started screaming at him and told him to get lost. And it's like, and it was also a little funny because Calvin was like, I need to know exactly the words you said and say it in the same tone. It's like, just as close as possible. He's like, I can't. It's like, and Boba just goes, Bogart just goes, say it to me if that would help. Because the guy's also like, woman, I can't say this stuff to you. That's inappropriate. And it's just... After he does say it finally, saying it to Bogart, it's a little easier not looking at her. Only the slightest flush betrayed any feeling on her part, on the part of the robo-psychologist. She said, I'm aware of the meaning of most of the terms used. The others, I suppose, are equally derogatory? I'm afraid so, agreed the tormented Black, and it's just kind of funny. So I highlighted that, because, I mean, it kind of is. Okay. So now we start getting into how they're going to solve identifying it, because the robot checks out in every noticeable metric. Because he wants to get lost, which would mean that he has to hide himself amongst these other nesters. But there's another element to it as well, which is, so he is trying to obey, but it is also that superiority complex. He wants to prove that he will outsmart these people and escape. So they come up with different scenarios, because initially they just realize, well, he's the only one that, if a human is put in danger that they didn't initiate, but they could try to interfere with, that he's the only one that doesn't need to act. So they put a human in the middle of a room with all the robots standing around and drop a massive weight that would crush the human. So there is a force thing that, pushes it out of the way. So the human actually isn't in any danger, but all of the robots still have to react. Well, all but the one nester, except it chooses to act because it recognizes that's what's expected of it. If it were one of the others. So that's a problem. All right, so then it's like, well, let's set up this experiment where now there's something, an impediment to them, that if they were to strike it, it would destroy them. And tell them that. And it's like, okay, well, the others would still be compelled to leap. Even though it would be to their own destruction, they're still compelled to do so. Not this one, not the modified one, though, because it would be like, well, I don't have to, and I do, in fact, have the third law of robotics saying I have to protect myself, so I, in fact, have a command not to. Technically, she made a mistake here, because she also told them this would be what's happening prior to the experiment being set up. And then all the nesters went away, and he actually talked to all of them and convinced them that, well, if doing this would, like, if you were to try to leap forward to save the human, but it results in your own destruction, that means you have no ability to actually save that human's life. It also means then that you would be destroyed as well. So it's better to just not act, because what if there is a situation in the future that you could save a human, but you weren't there because you were already destroyed in a wasteful act? In a way that actually, it is very, very briefly, lightly touched on, that technically that is also a terrifying result. Because to even have that much impressed on them is an issue. And hang on, it also just, that actually is a contradiction. Because it was stated earlier that they had argued with the robots earlier to not run into the gamma rays that would destroy them, but they would still do it. And it's like, well, this one actually managed to convince them of all that, so... I wonder how many other people have noticed that when reading this, that actually it invalidates the whole chapter. Because it's like, well, wait a minute. Because it'd be wait, what was that? They figured that out? We needed to make these 12 special ones. This dude... in the end, because it's even like, yeah, we'll make sure we destroy them when we're done. The plan was always to destroy them when they're done. So it could even be destroy them all now. You don't need them anymore. You just take 12 more from these that we know will be like, yeah, I'm not going to, because if the gamma radiation is there, it'll kill me. Yeah. It occurred to me that if I died on my way to him, I wouldn't be able to save him anyway. the weight would crush him, and then I would be dead for no purpose, and perhaps someday some other master might come to harm who wouldn't have if I had only stayed alive. But then it was did you think of this yourself? No. Who thought of it then? We were talking last night, and one of us got the idea, and it sounded reasonable. Also, another inconsistency that I realized, but this is one of those years have passed, so maybe it's changed. But with Donovan and Powell, it was mentioned that the robots are shipped, like with Cutie, the robots are shipped in pieces. They're not assembled at the plant. Well, they might be assembled but then disassembled just to make sure everything goes together. Kind of like how it technically doesn't have to come charged, but they do charge a lot of electronic devices. The e-readers, phones, tablets, all that. They do charge it to make sure that it works, and then they just shut it back down. They turn it back off. And that is a residual charge that you end up getting. It would make sense, but in any case, technically then those 62 that were shipped, that it was just they were dropping like the modified one off, and they have the others here because they're trying to obscure it. But it's like, well, it should have been dropped. It should have been the one that was modified is assembled, and the 62 are not. Those would be assembled when they get delivered. So this is another inconsistency, but it is one of those, okay, maybe they've changed that, where it's just easier for mass orders like this to have them pre-assembled, because they're destined to go elsewhere, so they'll just be pre-assembled, loaded on, and then sent. But it still is, that's technically inconsistency. But no, oh man, that other one. I'm going to have to add this note. I have to add it. By Nestor 10, convincing the 62 unmodified Nestors that sacrificing themselves in a doomed attempt to save a human is not worth it. It has solved the very problem that required the modified Nestors to begin with. Let me actually check here, because it's right near the end as well. Actually, no, it does. The other modified Nestors are, of course, to be destroyed. They will make shift with normal robots, or if necessary, do without. Good. So I guess in that, it's not... That's more of a recognizing that... Well, it's either they will be when we're done, but the will make do with normal robots implies no, that it will be done immediately. But it isn't acknowledged here that is a... Well, it turns out we don't need them modified anymore. We can just use any of these. Or explain it to them in that way, and then we're good. Because it is quite ironic, and it's that should be pointed out. I also do wonder, why can't you... What explanation has been given, or is... I don't believe an explanation has been given, but what explanation would there be for you can't just redo the positronic brain? It's never really explained. It seems almost like it is just a MacGuffin with how sensitive these things are. But anyway, in the end, what they do is they play on the Nestor's superiority complex, and the fact that there are actually two differences between this modified Nestor and the others. The modified Nestor has received some scientific training. None of the off-the-shelf Nestors, if you will, have. They do not know any of it. None of the training. So, they warn all of them that basically we're repeating the same thing again with there being an impediment that will destroy you. But instead of it being electrified cables, if they touch, will burn them away. Although, in reality, if they were to try it, the electricity would be shut off because they don't want to actually destroy the Nestors. The government doesn't want to spend all that money. What a concept. Instead, it's going to be this a wall of gamma radiation that will destroy them. And so the it would be the same situation for them. What she has done, and I don't like the explanation used here, but what she has done is actually change it to be infrared radiation. The thing is, the normal nesters can see that, oh, there's radiation there, but they can't tell it's infrared versus gamma, and infrared wouldn't harm them. The modified nester is able to distinguish between different types of radiation, and so, forgetting that the other robots don't know that, still gets up to try to save them, because like, oh, I can't actually get there safely, it's not going to endanger me. And that is enough. And for this final one, in part because of how frustrated she is, Calvin is the one who sits in the center of the room and sees this and just immediately yells for it to come to her with such urgency that it must comply, and that all the others are to be cleared out immediately. Because they can't lose track of it, and is also, this one is a major threat. What's interesting, though, is it said that they didn't explain to anyone else. Like, it was just between her and Black that it was infrared instead of gamma. But why would anyone else think then that this would work? I don't know. But I think a better explanation would have been rather than it being infrared. Because the idea that the robots would have sensors that could pick up different forms of radiation, but not recognize them, makes no sense to me. It would be like having a camera sensor that it can sense the colors of light, but it can't tell red from blue. That's a little bit of a problem. I mean, to be fair, technically they don't know. It's just they measure frequency, and technically all imagery, even this, what you're seeing with the webcam, is false color. Technically, very technically, we have just assigned that specific frequency appears as this color red. But potentially, if you could somehow objectively figure out how the brain interprets frequency to color, it might actually be not the color they originally meant. So yeah, but definitely, like, the image behind me, that would have to be a false color image. I'm trying to remember that's Chandra and Spitzer, which Spitzer is infrared and Chandra is X-ray. X-ray, you have no overlap with visible light. Spitzer is infrared. It may have had a little bit of overlap with visible light, but very, very little. So that is completely a false color image, because there are no colors associated with X-rays and infrared, not normally. So yeah, but that's literally how all the space telescopes are. Even Hubble, that does cover visible light. It also does cover the little ultraviolet, little that, because it's just measuring frequencies. And I'm going afield. But yeah, I think what would have been better is, instead of having be different frequencies of light, is if it were instead different intensities. Because that way they recognize it's gamma radiation, but the normal nesters don't recognize that, oh, it's at this lower level, that's not a danger to me. Whereas the one modified nester would know, that's too low of energy, it's not actually going to harm me. That just is a bit more reasonable to me. And it's also technically the reasoning is a little weak, but I mean, it still makes sense, because the trick is that the modified nester forgot that the others didn't know. But it remembered earlier that the others would react to try to save a human that's in danger, which is not what it needs to do. So it would think to do that, but it forgot this. And it before thought fast enough to react identically to the others. But here it forgot. By it forgetting, it now reacted slowly enough that it couldn't catch itself and correct. So it is a little off, but really, this story, Little Lost Robot, it's about what happens if you were to remove some of the ethics from the impressed ethics from the robots. What could possibly happen? And the way Asimov describes robots, they would go insane. And in fact, at the end, it does approach and is threatening her. Like, actually is like grabbing onto her and threatening her, and it does scare her. I mean, it describes her as shrieking, but then she does also say that she knows she wasn't in any danger, because there was enough of the first law left that even though it had gone insane, it could not kill her. But it could still do some bad stuff to her, and was trying to. But then they just flooded the area with sufficient gamma rays to kill it, and so that solved the problem. But yeah, it's just I get it. It's just I see some of those issues now, but I do still like it. I do still like it because it is about the logic here and trying to catch something that is going to act logically to protect itself, but forgets what that always may mean. And by the way, I think I forgot to mention, she had been an advocate from the beginning. Just destroy them all. There's no reason not to. I mean, it's like that way the problem is solved. But it's like, yeah, they're really expensive. We're not spending that money. And it's like, it's the government. Come on, you're probably already, like, I mean, that would be a rounding error for how much you're spending. So, and it would also get down to that whole, remember, these things are built for a purpose. They exist for a purpose. They are just tools. They are property. Their destruction, it can be tolerated. Oh, yeah, and I guess that's also true. You could, in theory, just use the gamma rays, because that destroys the positronic brain. You destroy the positronic brain and put new ones in. But still, it is, as I said, the fundamental idea is being able to modify the brain, and what would that mean? What would that result in? It is a somewhat interesting concept. And you can also see that with other characters in stories. And I know now, at this point, I'm just ranting, rambling, however you want to put it. When designing a character, how do you have them think? How do you have them what are their morals? So, for example, I'll give this one. And I'll be talking about this again when I do the assigned reading videos at some point. For The Children of Many Gifts, is a character in there, Dave. In some ways he is the bad guy, but in some ways he actually isn't. No, he legitimately isn't. He basically believes in survival of the fittest to an extreme. That because he believes, because this is super fantasy, he's somebody with these special abilities, he believes that because of that, he is superior, and therefore he should, and those like him should be treated as superior. Which is a somewhat amoral thought, because humans are all equal, and that's part of what the story is as well. But there's an aspect to it that doesn't end up happening for reasons that, if you read the book, you'll see. And by the way, links, not only the link to iRobot is in the description, but a little bit lower is also a link where you can find all my books. That's on Amazon, though, because that's the only place I have them at the moment. Sorry. But there was the plan for Sam, the character from Failure, to keep Dave alive, but to defeat him, to break him, so that he would stop his efforts and to just correct his amoral view. Because it's not that you're the bad guy, it's that you're wrong, is the way Sam would have viewed that and tried to deal with it. Don't need to go into it more so, but there is one character in the book, though, even at that point, who is more so actually evil. That is not just wrong, but is also evil. And then we do get another evil character and all that. So yeah, it gets a little involved there. But it is still technically, that is an interesting thing to explore, is the idea of having a character with modified morals from others. And what does that mean? Does it inherently make them a bad person? It doesn't have to. It certainly can, but it doesn't have to, because you can potentially do something to turn that. I guess another example for something potentially more well-known would be Boromir in The Lord of the Rings. In that his morality is based on protecting Gondor specifically, but potentially all men. He's not necessarily a big fan of Rohan, I can believe, but he sees it as, I need to protect people. The ring is a way for me to do that. So he is tempted by that. But in the end, he recognizes the folly of that and does get a he does die because of his being tempted, but he is still redeemed in the end. So you can still have that, but it's still he does have that moral flaw. So but then you get the redemption. So it works out very nicely, and it's really well done. I mean, it is. All right, that is enough of my talking. Which one is next? Escape, which I don't remember. Oh wait, no, hang on. As I think about it now, I think I actually might remember. I think I might remember that it's got. I think it's one or two robots steal a ship and are actually trying to like make it to Earth. I think that might be it. I don't quite remember. I don't quite remember. That might be it, but I barely remember this one, so it will be interesting to go through. And then evidence. That one I do remember, and then the inevitable conflict. That one I also remember. Those are both much more philosophical, much more morality-based stories there, and are interesting. I do disagree with the inevitable conflict, by the way. I will say that now. When we get to it, I will hopefully explain that. Evidence is the more interesting of the two when it comes to the philosophy stuff. That's enough of my yapping. So, yeah. See you next time.